West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
I've had this physically cut out and tacked up on the side of my bookshelf ever since Jane Mayer dropped this. She says, quote, Trump has already demonstrated a willingness to engage in almost unthinkable tactics to protect himself. Among his social circle in Palm Beach, speculation abounds that Florida's Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, might not honor an extradition request from New York if a bench warrant were issued for Trump's arrest. The state's attorney for Palm Beach County tells The New Yorker that he doubts such defiance would stand. Extradition, he points out, is a constitutional duty, and a governor's role in it is merely ministerial. But he admits that the process might not go smoothly. You know what, he says? I thought January 6th would go smoothly. Congress's role was just ministerial then, too. Governor DeSantis did not respond to a request for comment. So this was 8 weeks ago. Jane Mayer just dropping into this already newsy profile of the New York State prosecutors that are pursuing criminal charges against former President Trump, just dropping in the middle there that if Trump is indicted by those New York State prosecutors and there's a warrant out for his arrest in New York State, maybe the Republican governor of Florida would, hide Trump? Shield him from extradition like he's an international hijacker hiding out in Tehran or something? And that was a remarkable thing that Jane Mayer raised the prospect of 8 weeks ago in the New Yorker. Well, apparently, yes, that's a thing. That's happening. I mean, they're at least working on it. Politico.com today has picked up this storyline and run with it, and it turns out this is actually a thing in Trump world that they are working on. The knotty problem of how to shield him from extradition, once he's indicted and there's an arrest warrant for him, because apparently they expect that's on its way. Here's Politico's reporting today. All caps, scoop! Palm Beach makes contingency plans in case Trump is indicted. Law enforcement officials in Palm Beach County, Florida have actively prepared for the possibility that New York prosecutors could indict former President Donald Trump while he's at Mar-a-Lago, according to two high-ranking county officials involved in planning sessions. Among the topics discussed in those meetings, because they're having meetings about it, quote, how to handle the thorny extradition issues that could arise if an indictment against Trump moves forward. An obscure clause in Florida's statute on interstate extradition gives Governor Ron DeSantis the ability to intervene and investigate whether an indicted person, quote, ought to be surrendered to law enforcement officials from another state. Which means that as Mar-a-Lago prepares to close down for the season, didn't even know that was a thing. And as Trump therefore relocates to Bedminster, New Jersey this summer, it isn't just the Florida heat he's leaving behind. He could lose a key piece of political protection. If an indictment comes down while Trump is in Bedminster, New Jersey for the summer, this could all play out very differently. An attorney for Trump declined to comment. So, high-ranking county officials in the county where Trump lives in Florida are having meetings now, reportedly preparing for an anticipated standoff that will ensue once Trump is criminally charged, because they're expecting that. And once a warrant is issued for his arrest in New York, law enforcement officials and county officials meeting about this possibility in Florida, and now, through the press, publicizing in advance that there is a little clause in Florida state law that might let the Republican governor down there try to shield Trump from arrest somehow. Yeah, you wonder why all the Trump people keep floating the idea that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is going to be Trump's new running mate when he runs in 2024. Yeah, keep flattering the guy. They're trying to line you up so you'll keep Trump out of jail soon, like this year, way before 2024. When they tell you you're going to be his running mate, it's because they're trying to get you to build a moat around his castle to keep law enforcement away. The Wall Street Journal reports today that a private school in New York has just been subpoenaed in conjunction with the New York investigation in a way that might not just signal additional pressure on witnesses against Trump in that investigation. It might signal that additional tax-related allegations about violations of federal tax law could be referred from those state prosecutors back to SDNY, which would involve a whole nother set of prosecutors on his case. And in that context, the 378th most clicked on news story of the day is, oh, by the way, ho-hum, we might have a physical battle ahead sometime soon, sometime over the next few months, in which the former president tries to barricade himself in Florida with the help of local Republican officials who say they'll try to keep him from being arrested by either the feds or New York State. You know, totally normal. Some ex-presidents open a library, right? Or start a foundation. This one goes shopping for somewhere without an extradition treaty where he can rule from exile.
It is Friday, the 14th of May of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all night hawks in the diner of life. Well, the French 77s are virtually mixed, poured, and ready for your virtual imbibing pleasure, so do. You can do anything in the virtual world with no repercussions, they say. Well, a little bit of personal news. I was able to schedule surgery for Gunner, our snoozing sous chef, when I took him in for his yearly shots and checkup. Dr. Dickey said that Gunner's soft palate has descended a bit more than last time for his examination. So we're going to do laser surgery, and that will help his breathing tremendously. The snoring is not good on anyone's heart. And apparently, according to the veterinarian, it's even worse for a dog. It will shorten their lives, and I don't want that. I want every sentient being to live long, glorious lives. Okay. So we're going to do that. It makes me a little sad because, I don't know, it's laser surgery, so it's not a knife. And it's one of those deals where he checks in the morning and I'm picking him up later in the afternoon. So that's something. But I still worry about the trauma. This poor fellow has been through a bit before he ended up with us. Us being myself and my elderly mom. Oh, speaking of mom, she finally got to see the orthopedic specialist. At least we went to the office and got worked up by the PA, and she got a cortisone shot. So she's been in some abject pain for quite a while. And, not knowing what it is always an issue. But now that she knows, and it's not actually very good. She's got compressed discs. She has arthritis in the spine where it is twisting on its axis. Ew. No wonder she's been in pain. But she's been having some really bad problems with her hip area, the saddle, hip, ball joint area, that whole area there. And, she's got arthritis. So they gave her a cortisone shot to, part of it was for therapy, but also a diagnostic tool, and can determine about when and if she'll be getting a hip replacement. So some people might worry about an elderly mom, age 84. She just turned 84 on Sunday. I'm sorry, on Monday. What am I talking about? We had the party on Sunday, but the actual day was on Monday. Mother's Day was Sunday, and then Mom's birthday was the next day. And sometimes her birthday falls on Mother's Day. So she has two parties at once, and that's kind of like what we did this year, except she's now 84, and so one worries. But she is a, shall we say, a hearty gal. Very hearty. Yeah, it's still shocking. You know, it's my mom. Okay, it's not as if I've never heard my mom drop an F-bomb before, but she's 84. So hearing my 84-year-old mom, who's like barely 5 foot now, because you shrink. Dropping the F-bomb, it's you're going to be a little shocking. But then on the other hand, I look at myself in the mirror, and I am no spring chicken. Oh boy. Wow. The arc of life. We're all told about it, but until you actually experience it, yeah, it's all speculation until you actually experience it. Well, enough of the personal biz. A little bit of worry, but maybe some a path to a much more quality, a higher quality of life for Gunner, the English Bulldog, and my dear elderly mom, because hips are rough. I mean, you can't get away from them. It's hard to favor, and when you favor, you always damage the other side too. So, worry is there, but the outcome, quality of life, would be, well, something to hope for. All right. We actually have quite a show here today. There's so much news again out there. We got that Elise Stefanik taking over the GOP leadership. Do we still call them the GOP? Now, I had made reference, and I have been making reference to the GOP as pretty much the Nazis. I don't know what to call them. So I call them Nazis for short. There's all sorts of, even neo-Nazi is a little bit too much. Nazi for short just pretty much describes exactly what's going on with the GOP. Though there are many in the GOP who are quite offended by being labeled Nazis. Of course, these are the same people that label anybody like Black Lives Matter are a bunch of commies, and Antifa, I don't know. Antifa is almost like being a commie now. It's also a derogatory term. Well, yeah, Black Lives Matter is too, but you know what I mean. You commie, you socialist, yeah, right. Antifa, terrorist. Yeah, get that all the time. And then just come back and say, well, you're a Nazi. And oh my God, the fainting couch is just overused. They can't get enough fainting couches. So I did refer to someone who had self-described themselves out here on the West Coast in our little Facebook town group on the page. And this fellow had described himself as a conservative, thought that would be nice if there was just like a space for only conservatives. And knowing the history of sundown towns in the region, when someone says they want a conservative-only space, it really means white only. And, of course, when you say that means that you are the real racist because you brought up race. No one else brought up race. Oh, really? And so, because I've been, shall we say, have some troubles with Zuckerberg, he and I go back and forth. Well, not personally, but it feels like it. And I tend to, express myself a little bit more succinctly on Twitter. Why not? You're limited to the characters, and so you have to be succinct. And so rather than describing this self-described conservative as a self-described conservative, I just abbreviated and called him a Nazi. So when we had the tete-a-tete about his whites, what he called conservative-only space, and then he obviously, the next argument is that, look, there's a lot of famous black people who are conservatives. And Alan West, I don't count them. He cited Candace Owens and Tim Scott as heroes. So, of course, I come from a background where if somebody says some of my best friends are black, that's usually how you tell that they're bigots. You're going to other a friend like that? What are you doing? And, of course, the self-awareness is not quite there. But the fellow apparently saw my Twitter post, referring to him as a Nazi, not knowing that, I'm calling the whole GOP the Nazi party. The guy or the administrator did take that post down, and so with it all the comments, which is good. Because in a certain way, I'm wondering, do what I call a GOP party member to their face in one of those infamous diners that the New York Times always goes to interview those people? If I call them a Nazi to their face, is that polite? On the other hand, should we even be polite to Nazis? See, there's that question, too. Well, in America, rather than use physical violence to have our way, we have this weird sort of thing called voting. Representative democracy, because all of us can't go up there and start screaming. We need to filter it somehow, and so we elect a representative to advance our voice so that we can fill the potholes, fix the bridges. See the crack on that bridge? My God. And have a higher quality of life, as the founders originally intended. But are all conservatives Nazis? All Nazis are conservatives. And it seems that, these terrorists that stormed the Capitol on January 6th, well, maybe you could say that not all of the maggots that day were terrorists, but all the terrorists were maggots? Is that how it goes? Anyway, some people get caught up. Maybe they aren't just good Republicans. Maybe they would be part of the group of what now is it? 143, 150 Republicans who have signed a pact that they will break away from the GOP and start a third party. Yeah. Well, maybe there's a lot of people that would do that because it seems like the toxic third with the guns, that toxic third that is always part of our body politic. If they want to be labeled the GOP party, I call them Nazis for short, fine. And I think that possibly there's more GOP voters that are not part of that toxic third, obviously. So do I condemn all of them as good Republicans? Well, if you don't take the action to break away from the crimes, if you just countenance the crimes by silence, you are complicit. So you are a good Republican, just like the good German of old. So, I've thought maybe I shouldn't be so impolite to just, be a dick and call everybody in opposition a Nazi. Now, I'm not calling everybody in opposition a Nazi, just Republicans. Okay, let's be clear. Because right now, the Republican Party is running itself like a Nazi party. and their behaviors and actions all the way. I mean, even Trump with this Project Veritas, James O'Keefe's group, along with Eric Prince. Eric Prince is like training Project Veritas people how to spycraft. How nice. And so they're trying to do one of these Project Veritas entrapment videos, I guess, or whatever. Now, they keep calling it a honeypot. I guess they sent out some pretty girls to try to, they said, well, we're going to try to get some audio or some tape of these people in the Trump administration. If they say anything bad about Trump, any criticism about Trump, well, then they can get fired or worse. And to me, that sounds, very Vladian, very Russian, a hybrid of Gestapo and Russian tactics. It seems unseemly. So we had that sentiment. That sentiment is saturated throughout the whole of the GOP. It is a rot. And those who are rotten always deny the rot. It takes a little bit of self-awareness to say, I am rotting. I got to get out of here. So if I wanted to have a more positive attitude, I would hold on to the positive attitude that there's more of those types that I've been calling good Republicans that will actually take the step to move away from the crimes and not be complicit by silence. But I'm also experienced enough that I'm not going to wait for it. All right? Just remember, every time you vote, you punch a Nazi. Maybe even 10. How's that for some enthusiasm to vote? It gets me enthusiastic. All right. In fact, I got to get my ballot in for these local elections I got to tell you, like water districts. I don't, who are these people? What are they going to do? Are they going to hack our water system by getting in I don't know. I've been trying to find out. But regardless, we have a little local election here that's ballot is due tomorrow. So I better put that in today. Okay, on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Oh, wow, look at the time. Well, at the top, Ron DeSantis might find a way to prevent Trump from being extradited for prosecution. But you know what? That's going to hurt the 2022 elections and 2024, too. So keep that in mind. All right? And Ron really thinks he can be president. Oh, my God. Of course, we got Liz Cheney going, too. And I keep warning people about Liz Cheney. All right? Just remember. I don't need to finish the sentence. Just remember. On the rest of the menu, House Democrats reintroduced legislation that would ensure farm workers get paid overtime after 80 years of being ignored on the issue. 80. Missouri Republicans ignored their own constitution and refused to expand Medicaid. Oh, you little people voted in a constitutional amendment. We don't need to follow that because that was done by liberals. And a former Army Green Beret is scheduled to be sentenced for Russian espionage. Good. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Scottish police freed 2 Indian men who were being transported by a UK immigration force. And black Brazilians demonstrated in the country's 2 largest cities to protest against racism and police violence. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link across the page, to the left near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. If you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring patronage helps us pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue this resistance against the Nazi takeover of America. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink and you could afford to send those funds to us once a month, we are able to stretch those dollars beyond compare, even on the quantum level. That's how adept we are at doing so. And being able to do so means we can pay our bills. And it means we can fly under the radar. And it means the result is that we continue this resistance broadcast against the Nazi takeover of America, as we've been doing for the last 10 years. And it's been because of your generosity, and thank you very much for helping us fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and we thank Tom for doing that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. Yes, it's my real name. And I post the show notes and links diary. It will always be a diary. On Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that linked up on social media platforms like Twitter and that Zuckerberg one, plus others. And and do check out the show notes and links because that's where the real reportage is. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, iTunes, and really wherever podcasts can be found. They're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. Everywhere. All right. My week-ending rant went pretty long, so I better get into these news articles because they are actually quite important. And this first one's out of the American Independent by Amy Liu. House Democrats have reintroduced legislation to ensure farm workers are compensated fairly for overtime work, an attempt to confront existing labor laws that have excluded them from such rights for more than 80 years. That's right. The 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act excluded farm workers because mostly they were family farms, right? And you're not going to pay your kid overtime. Well, you know what? They aren't family farms anymore. They're factory farms, by and large. Now, the Fairness for Farm Workers Act, which would compensate farm workers for any overtime exceeding 40 hours per week, was introduced by Representative Paul Oral Grijalva. I always mess up his name. Of course, we know he's a Democrat from Arizona who co-sponsored the effort and said the measure would amend the 38 Fair Labor Standards Act and bring to an end discriminatory provisions preventing farm workers from receiving overtime pay. United Farm Workers, the nation's largest farm workers union, has spoken out in support of the bill, saying it would protect vulnerable workers from being abused by their employers. I remember when I signed my contract to go from an hourly cook, well, I was a chef, but an hourly employee to a salaried employee. You know, I always felt like being salaried was nice because back in the day, then it meant that you got some benefits and you were respected for your expertise and you're a valuable employee and you're being brought into the fold. You're being salaried. You're being guaranteed remuneration and benefits for your efforts and your loyalty back to the company. And I was told when I signed my contract, said right there that I would expect to have to work an occasional 60-hour week. And I thought, well, sure. You're salaried. You got a lot more responsibilities. You got paperwork, which I did because I had to be in the office, but I also had to be out on the yachts cooking. It was for Compass Rose Yacht Charters back in the day. And yes, it is true. I occasionally worked a 60-hour week because most of them were 95 to 100-hour weeks. So be careful when you get salaried. All right, so farm workers are far off and too invisible. They live and work in rural isolation. They aren't available to meet except in late evening or on Sunday. And this country needs to see and hear from people who have kept our domestic food supply safe and intact. Elizabeth Strader, the Farm Worker Union's Director of Strategic Campaigns, told the American Independent. Overtime at its core is a health and safety protection to safeguard employers from working the human body beyond healthy endurance. Grijalva introduced House versions of the bill in 2018 and 2019. Then California Senator Kamala Harris introduced companion bills in the Senate. At the time, Harris called on Congress to right the wrongs of the 38 Fair Labor Standards Act, which had denied farm workers overtime pay for decades. Now, it's also important to remember that the Depression-era labor law has roots in slavery and the exploitation of black laborers. As the website The Counter noted, the 38 Fair Labor Standards Act established the 40-hour work week as well as overtime pay, but exempted farm workers to appease lawmakers from the South, which relied heavily on the black population for cheap labor. President Franklin D. Roosevelt needed those lawmakers' votes to pass the New Deal. Did you know that every lawmaker, every elected lawmaker, in fact, actually appointed people, our law enforcement, military, they take an oath to the Constitution of the United States. And if you're a state lawmaker, you also take an oath to the Constitution of your state, along with the Constitution of the United States. So what happens when an elected official violates their oath and does not uphold the Constitution of their state? What happens? Well, Josh Israel wrote an article in the American Independent about this very matter. What happens? Nothing, apparently. The Missouri Constitution was amended last year to require the state to expand Medicaid eligibility. Yesterday, Thursday, Missouri Republican Governor Mike Parson announced that he and the GOP-controlled legislature were going to simply ignore it. Although I was never in support of Missouri Health Net expansion, I always said that I would uphold the ballot amendment if it passed. The majority of Missouri voters supported it, and we included funds for the expansion in our budget proposal. However, without a revenue source or funding authority from the General Assembly, we are unable to proceed with the expansion at this time. Don't get sick. When Congress enacted the Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare, in 2010, they included a provision to allow more lower-income Americans to receive health insurance through the Medicaid program. The law required states to cover all adults who earn less than 133% of the federal poverty level and provided 90% of the funding. But the Supreme Court ruled in 2011 that the expansion was optional. While most states have opted to take the funds and cover their citizens, some GOP-run states have not, leaving millions uninsured. After Missouri's Republican-led legislature refused to expand Medicaid for nearly a decade, voters circumvented them last year by putting a state constitutional amendment on the ballot. Despite Parsons' strong opposition, voters approved the amendment requiring expansion at 53.27% to 46.73%. Parson and every member of the state legislature took an oath of office in which they solemnly pledged to support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Missouri and faithfully perform the duties of my office. Violation of that oath is considered perjury and grounds for lifetime disqualification from public office. Still, the legislature rejected adopting any funding mechanism to implement the law last month. Oh, you mean you have to put in a funding mechanism in the amendment? Is that how it works? Supporters of the amendment now say they will sue to get the law implemented, and 275,000 people in the state covered immediately. Missouri's constitution is crystal clear. Medicaid expansion must begin on July 1. Jonathan Schleifer, executive director of the Fairness Project, told The Hill. Governor Parsons' announcement today that he intends to ignore the will of Missouri's voters and violate the Constitution makes this a matter for Missouri's courts to resolve. Giuliani's kid went on Russian state TV to complain about America. Yeah, it's pretty cool about America first, folks, huh? Complain about America first. And apparently he is under the impression that a lot of people want to leave America because it's so bad right now. Let me give some advice to the kids out there. Don't work for Russia. It looks glamorous, okay? But you're going to get in trouble. Just like this guy here, a former Green Beret. This offering in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, by the way, comes out of the Associated Press by anonymous staff. Well, a former Army Green Beret who admitted divulging military secrets to Russia over a 15-year period is scheduled to be sentenced on espionage charges. Peter Zabinski Debbins, age 46, which means he started doing this stuff when he was 30. So come on, kids, stop doing that. All right, be careful. He's from Gainesville, Virginia, pleaded guilty in November, as we reported here on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, to a federal espionage charge in U.S. District Court in Alexandria, and he's going to be sentenced today. Debbins' relationship with Russian intelligence dates to 1996 and spanned 15 years. It began when he was an ROTC student at the University of Minnesota, and on a visit to Russia gave a handler there the names of 4 Catholic nuns he had visited after a Russian intelligence agent told him the nuns were involved in cult activity. In later years, he provided details about activities of his Special Forces unit overseas and the names of fellow Special Forces members, for bounties. Debbins' lawyer is pressing for a lighter sentence. The lawyer argues that Debbins caused minimal damage and that Russian agents had blackmailed Debbins by threatening to expose his same-sex attractions in a military era in which "don't ask, don't tell" was still in force. Prosecutors are seeking a 17-year term. They say Debbins never told the FBI anything about being blackmailed. They say his original explanation of his motive is far more likely, that he was bitter about his time in the Army, and that he considered himself a loyal son of Russia. All right, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You're listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back. right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Retro Spy. Originally entitled Ironbark for the codename of the real-life Russian protagonist in the story, the movie The Courier is a quiet but engaging spy thriller in the British tradition. It is, in fact, based on true events that form part of the backstory to the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's not a complicated tale. Affable British businessman Greville Wynne is recruited by MI6 as a courier because of his ongoing successful sales efforts in the then-communist Eastern Europe. Upon the natural-looking expansion of his operation to the Soviet Union, he makes contact with Oleg Penkovsky, a connected and senior bureaucrat whose portfolio includes not only trade, but also access to military information. Negatively impressed with Nikita Khrushchev and the irresponsibility of his plans to place missiles in Cuba, he agrees to supply information he believes will ratchet down tensions. The movie is mostly the story of the relationship between Penkovsky, played by veteran Mirab Nineeds, and that of Wynne, brought off by Benedict Cumberbatch, as the stakes ever so slowly increase. That's actually a good part of what makes this one work. In the first act, there's almost a light feel to the proceedings, as Wynne can't believe he's lunching with spies. Later, though, we see the craft before the final act where the consequences of Penkovsky's idealism and Wynne's loyalty hit home. In one pivotal scene before the really heavy chapters begin, the two are seen in facial close-up watching a performance of Swan Lake. Their expressions, alongside the performance, presage the rest of the story, which is why directors choose players this good. The Courier is a smart spy flick with no explosions or gunfire and an effective period piece. It's a must-see for fans of the genre. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Emily Schwing. Imagine this. You're in a lab in Indiana. Your arm's stuck in a box. The box is filled with bloodthirsty insects. And those insects, well, they intend to feed on you.
The staff scientist who works with me, Dr. Samuel Rund, he has a very good arm that he doesn't mind exposing to mosquitoes to feed off him.
Notre Dame professor Giles Duffield convinced a colleague to play the role of blood meal for his research on mosquito genetics and behavior. It's published in the American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. Duffield cared less about whether his colleagues would be delicious. That was obvious. What he really wanted to know was, like humans kept awake by the light of their cell phones, would artificial lighting keep mosquitoes up and biting deep into the night? So Duffield and his colleagues created an experiment. They'd monitor the biting behaviors of mosquitoes who'd been exposed to pulses of artificial light throughout the night.
The effect on the biting at night were approaching those that we would see during the late afternoon when we expect to see their peak biting. It doubled their feeding activity. So it's not a small change. It's a very robust increase in their biting behavior.
There are a number of different species of mosquitoes, and they behave in different ways. Some bite only at night. Others are daytime feeders. But there's one species in particular that Duffield and colleagues were focused on: Aedes aegypti.
Aedes aegypti has sort of evolved alongside humans and is very adept to living within human habitation. So any sort of environmental changes that would influence its feeding and biting behavior could have huge ramifications on humans, probably more than any other mosquito species.
Duffield says Aedes aegypti are the major vector for the human transmission of diseases like encephalitis, chikungunya, malaria, dengue fever, and the Zika virus. These are all diseases that have made headlines in recent years. And that's why he needed his colleague's arm.
We feel as though this is a nice, simple assay. and it represents a more natural stimulus for the mosquito. Carbon dioxide, odorant, smells, body temperature, the attraction to warmth, and the physical skin and the chemicals that are released from the skin. So it certainly represents a more natural mosquito host biting response. But yeah, it's unfortunate for those who are the investigators because when you get 30 mosquito bites per assay, it's painful sometimes.
The next step is to look at how different species of mosquitoes respond to different kinds of light.
That's something that we're busy trying to investigate right now. In the original experimentation, we just used broad spectrum white light. As we fine-tune our current and future experiments, we're interested in seeing if specific wavelengths or color spectrums of light have the same effect or less effect.
And Duffield has some ideas.
Possibly the brighter the light, the larger the effect. But again, you may find extremely bright light inhibits the mosquito. So there may be a sort of sweet spot in the intensity of light, the illuminance.
He says the color of light and the time of night when mosquitoes are exposed to light are also parameters worth exploring. He's also interested in studying different species of bloodsucker. Not all mosquitoes feed at night. Since some mosquitoes are day feeders, it raises the question of whether artificial light at night would affect them at all. Eventually, the goal is to figure out if they can make recommendations on how people in mosquito-prone parts of the world should light their homes. In the short term, though, future findings will hopefully disarm hungry mosquitoes while preserving the arms of the study subjects they feed on. For 60 Second Science, I'm Emily Schwing.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Here are some facts about the most dangerous place to be during a pandemic. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The United States has the largest immigrant detention system in the world, with tens of thousands of people locked up in some 200 facilities across the country. People locked up by ICE have committed no crime. They're not serving time, but rather being held civilly as they await a hearing in immigration court that will decide whether they may remain in the country. ICE jails and prisons generally are run by private prison companies, where the motivating principle is profits. And those private prison companies have done a terrible job during the pandemic when it comes to testing social distancing, mask-wearing staff protocols, and medical treatment. ICE's position is that they've taken extensive steps to safeguard detainees, staff, and contractors, a position not easy to reconcile with other facts reported by the New York Times. Prisons have been notorious for their failure to contain and prevent COVID-19, and the infection rate for COVID-19 in these company-run ICE prisons has been 5 times greater than the infection rate for other jails and prisons, which makes the infection rate for these ICE facilities 20 times greater than the infection rate for the general population, which puts the communities inside and outside the walls at risk, unnecessarily and inhumanely. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1913. That was the day Philadelphia longshoremen walked off the job. Led by the industrial workers of the world, the strike was remarkable for its militancy, its industrial unionism, and its interracial organizing. The Wobblies had been fighting to organize workers in the city for years. Unionizing efforts included Amalgamated Local 57, which organized workers across whole industries. Attracted to the IWW's message of interracial unionism, black longshoreman Ben Fletcher joined up readily and soon emerged as an early leader of Local 57 and then Longshoremen's Local 8. In his book, Wobblies on the Waterfront, historian Peter Cole notes the origins of the local started with the striking sugar refinery workers on the banks of the Delaware. Dockers made contact with the IWW during the strike and drew up a list of grievances and demands. And by this day in 1913, 1,500 longshoremen struck for a leveling of the hourly wage for all workers, regardless of skill, shorter hours, and union recognition. They held strike meetings every day and elected a committee of 15 with representatives from every ethnic and racial group. Cole notes this was crucial, given the diversity of the dock's 4,000 workers. More than a third were black, another third were immigrants. The committee included Poles, Jews, blacks, Irish, and others. Strikers took on their employers and also the police. Beatings, intimidation, and arrests of strikers occurred daily and intensified as the ship owners attempted to herd in scabs. 1,200 coal and iron ore handlers joined in on the strike. The port was solidly shut down, and by the end of the month, the shippers were forced to concede to most of the Wobblies' demands. Industrial unionism and interracial solidarity had won the day.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all night hawks in the diner of life. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 58 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting to be much cooler than yesterday, and yesterday we went into the low 90s. And today we're only expected to be in the upper 70s, low 80s. I think it's going to be closer to the low 80s. Mostly sunny throughout the day. Winds out of the north-northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour. And partly cloudy skies overnight with lows around 51. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Mainly sunny tomorrow, Saturday, with highs in the low 80s, which means they'll probably be in the mid to upper 80s, and winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County, in the southern part of Oregon, now stand at 10,862. They keep rising, folks. And our deceased have increased to 139. But we get to take off our masks. You know, if you're fully vaccinated, you get to take off your mask. But you know how you can tell if people are vaccinated in Southern Oregon? They're wearing masks. They're the only ones who are. Grass pollen is rated very high right outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is good at 29 parts per million. Hey, that daytime UV index has actually dropped 2 notches, though it is still in the high range. It went from very high to high, but from 8 down to 6. But you know what? Put on the SP50 anyway. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.06 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles. And relative humidity is at 80%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that's known as the Weather Underground. London is 54 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 57 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 60 degrees and mostly cloudy with a thunderstorm warning, which could affect the electrical grid, so take care. Kyiv is 68 and fair. Kabul is 68 and fair. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 68 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 55 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 50 degrees and cloudy. And New York, New York is 70 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. David Milliken of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Scottish police ordered the release of 2 Indian men who had been detained by British immigration officials after hundreds of protesters in Glasgow blocked the path of a van carrying the detainees. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, who wants to arrest immigration powers from the UK government, welcomed the police force's actions and blamed the British government for what she called a dangerous situation. Video footage showed the 2 men emerging from the back of a van belonging to Britain's Interior Ministry, which sets immigration rules for the whole UK. After a standoff lasting several hours, a crowd of onlookers clapped and cheered as one of the men waved and police officers made space for them to walk free, pending further investigation. British immigration officials had originally asked local police for assistance after a crowd gathered to block them. Police Scotland said in a statement that it had taken the operational decision to release the men detained by UK immigration enforcement back to their community. The police said it reached this decision to protect the safety, public health, and well-being of all people involved in the detention and subsequent protest. Large gatherings are currently banned in Scotland as part of anti-COVID measures. Sturgeon, whose Scottish Parliament electoral district includes the area where the incident took place, said she had complained to the British government and asked it to avoid such situations in the future. No assurances were given and, frankly, no empathy shown when I managed to speak to a junior minister earlier, she said in a statement. Britain's Interior Ministry said it would press on with plans to speed up deportations.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Reuters staff brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Black Brazilians demonstrated in the country's 2 largest cities yesterday, Thursday, to protest against racism and police violence towards their communities in a local version of the Black Lives Movement in the U.S., with some accusing the country's president of genocide. They were also protesting what they called the false anniversary of the abolition of slavery, officially marked for the day in 1888 when the Brazilian monarch's daughter, Princess Isabel, signed the law freeing the slaves. Black Brazilians celebrate the end of slavery on November 20th, the anniversary of the killing of Zumbi, a figure of resistance against slavery and the last leader of a runaway slaves community called the Palmares. Around 1,000 people marched through downtown Rio de Janeiro in the evening, holding candles and signs saying, "Don't kill me, kill racism," and accusing far-right President Bolsonaro of genocide through police violence. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and for the week, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day, all night, and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme aux langues de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.